Hollywood costume designer Deborah Nadoolman-Landis said, "Costumes are one channel by which a character is transformed from the written page to a multi-dimensional people. When a character in a film captures the public's imagination, the costumes can ignite worldwide fashion trends and influence global culture. Cinematic icons are born when the audience falls deeply in love with the people in the story. And that's what movies and costume design is all about." In order of release date and not including the superhero genre, here are 10 of the most epic men's movie costume designs of the last century. Rick Blaine, Trench and Fedora, Casablanca. It's hard to separate the man from his trench and fedora, but Humphrey Bogart owns this look even to this day. Classic blogger writes that Humphrey Bogart remains one of the most legendarily well-dressed film stars of all time, his style on and off screen as iconic as anything else about him. Bogey first wore a fedora and trench coat as private investigator Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, a 1941 film noir written and directed by John Huston. To this day, the 1940s hard-boiled detective is often imagined dressed this way thanks to Bogart. Bogey would follow up The Maltese Falcon with Casablanca, donning his now famous trench and fedora look once again. Warner Brothers' longtime Hollywood costume designer Orr Kelly designed the costumes for Casablanca, although I'm not certain if he did the men's wardrobe. One reason why Bogart commanded this look is his effortless and unique way that he wears clothes. Case in point, Bogey never fastened the belt using the buckle, but preferred to tie it in a loose knot. Now, there is some discrepancy about what type of trench Bogey actually wore. Back in 2012, Burberry used an image from Casablanca with Bogey wearing his trench and fedora and was sued by Stephen Bogart, son of Lauren and Bogey, claiming that it was without permission of the Bogart estate. The junior Bogart stated, "It is well known my father was a loyal Aquascutum customer in his personal life." Although in this promotional still, Bogey's trench appears to be lined with Burberry's trademark check. Trench coats were first developed by both British tailors Aquascutum and Burberry, makers of military-issue coats and sporting attire for gentlemen. Burberry had developed a waterproof yet breathable fabric called gabardine that became the standard for trench coats in the early part of the 20th century. The coat gets its name for World War I British officer uniforms worn in the trenches, and both fashion houses still make trenches to this day. While in screenshots Bogart appears taller than Ingrid Bergman, it's reported that Bogart, standing at 5'8", was 2 inches shorter than Bergman. Bogart had to wear platform shoes to play alongside Bergman and compensate for the height disparity. And then director Michael Curtis apparently had Bogart stand on blocks or sit on pillows or pads in their scenes together. And other reports state that he wore lifts in his shoes to give him additional height. Bogart's fedora was supplied by Italian luxury manufacturer Borsellino, established in 1857 and produced in Alessandria, Italy. In collaboration with the Humphrey Bogart estate, Borsellino now features a reproduction of Bogey's gray brush felt hat made from hair and rabbit fur and trimmed with a black grosgrain ribbon. Suitably, the hat is called the Bogart. Jim Stark, jeans and tee, rebel without a cause. By today's standards, James Dean's casual wardrobe might seem unremarkable, except that in the 1950s, Dean was a hot commodity in his very short career. Fans flocked to shops in droves to achieve his casual style. His celebrity style was propelled even further by his tragic death on September 30th, 1955, nearly a month before Rebel Without a Cause was released on October 27th. Dean's quiff hairstyle, a variation of the pompadour, became popular as a post-war reaction to military buzz cuts and flat wartime styles, according to Fashion Beans. Stylist Riri Roquette states that the quiff, as a style, it has always represented rebellion, and it screams confidence. It's a hairstyle that literally takes up more space, so it makes you stand out and gets you noticed. Rebel was originally meant to be shot in black and white, and some scenes had already been filmed that way when the studio decided to switch to color. Classique blog writes that Rebel director Nicholas Ray paid great importance to color in his films. For Rebel, he called in a color consultant and they looked for ideas in old copies of Life magazine. He chose to use primary colors and vivid blocks, creating symbolism through color and costume. Pictured here is Dean and co-star Natalie Wood with director Nicholas Ray. Ray said, "When you first see Jimmy in his red jacket against his black merc, it's not just a pose, it's a warning, it's a sign." Meanwhile, Classique blog reports that costume designer Moss Mabry created 3 copies of the jacket. Even though it looks simple, it wasn't, he said. The pockets were in just the right place, the collar was just the right size. With movies of this age, especially when the cast and crew have passed away, it's difficult to know for certain what is the truth. While the costume designer stated that he made 3 jackets, I've seen multiple claims that the jacket was just an off-the-rack purchase of a Red McGregor antifreeze jacket like the one we see here. According to IMDb, one of the 3 jackets was obtained in the early 1960s by American avant-garde filmmaker Kenneth Anger and sent to the museum collection in Paris of the French Cinematic, which had been helpful in showing and promoting his work. But then, in 1972, the jacket was stolen. But in another twist, I discovered a past listing at Palm Beach Modern Auctions claiming that this Burma Originals nylon windbreaker, put up for auction in 2008, was James Dean's jacket from Rebel. Wardrobe supervisor Leon Roberts had apparently obtained the jacket at the end of filming. But then Julian Auctions in California declined the item because there was inconclusive evidence that it was the actual jacket. The majority of the high school gang in Rebel wore distressed Levi's 501s purchased from Matson's on Hollywood Boulevard, but James Dean wore Lee Riders 101s. What made Lee jeans a preferred denim brand in the 1950s was that the Lee 101s, originally created for cowboys, were the first slim-fit jeans with a zip fly. Levi's, meanwhile, were still baggy and featured a stiff button fly. According to Christopher Laverty on his blog Clothes on Film, the unreal blue of his jeans was actually achieved by overdying. All the denim used in the film was dipped to make the dye appear more vibrantly blue, as using Technicolor would have made it appear muddy green on screen. While this is a wardrobe test for Giant, which was Dean's final film, he's again wearing Lee 101's brand jeans. Here's the inside waistband featuring the Warner Brothers label. Dean's pair of Lee 101's Rider jeans was sold at Heritage Auctions in October 2006 for $35,850. T-shirt sales soared after James Dean wore the simple white tee in Rebel, popularizing underwear as outerwear. Searching for James Dean's white t-shirt, the undershirt guy had set out a quest to learn the brand name of the shirt. Around September of 2012, the original white t-shirt worn by James Dean was sold by Nate D. Sanders Auctions for a little over $6,000. According to the undershirt guy, the t-shirt was originally obtained from makeup artist Gordon Bow, who did Dean's makeup in 3 of his films. In the end, undershirt guy couldn't say conclusively, but based upon his research, speculates that James Dean was most likely wearing a Towncraft undershirt from JCPenney. And finally, James Dean's boots worn in Rebel Without a Cause are these black leather engineer boots. This picture is from the 2008 Shoes of Cinema exhibit in Madrid. Engineer boots are laceless leatherwork boots popular among motorcycle riders, which is why they were also popular with Marlon Brando. I can't confirm the brand, but it's likely they're either the Chippewa Shoe Manufacturing Company or the Fry Company. And you can see that the original leather strap and buckle have been cut away for some reason. T.E. Lawrence robes, Lawrence of Arabia. In Lawrence of Arabia, legendary British actor Peter O'Toole portrays British archaeologist and army officer T.E. Lawrence. In the years since its release in 1962, the film has been recognized as one of the greatest and most influential films in the history of cinema. With his striking blue eyes and blonde hair, a tanned O'Toole struck an unforgettable pose in his white and ivory silk robes against a vista of sand and sky, a stark contrast to the earthier colors of his co-stars Anthony Quinn and Omar Sharif. The costumes were created by British costume designer Phyllis Dalton, multiple Academy and BAFTA Award winner. Lawrence of Arabia missed out its 11th Oscar nomination for Best Costume Design because someone forgot to submit Dalton's name for consideration. Here is Dalton's costume design for Lawrence. According to a BAFTA tribute to Phyllis Dalton, she used an authentic military tailor to fashion O'Toole's uniforms, but ensured that they were all squirmingly uncomfortable, which amplified the moment of liberation that comes when Lawrence adopts Arab dress. As the film progressed, however, Dalton made the fabric of O'Toole's thobe and ziban, an overrobe, increasingly gossamer-like, and gave the impression that the hard lines of Lawrence's body were evaporating at the same rate as his sanity. And just to let you know, a thobe is an ankle-length garment usually with long sleeves, although depending on the region, it might also be called a kaftan, abaya, or jalabas. Lawrence explains in his autobiography, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, the reason why he preferred wearing Arab fashions over his British military uniform. He wrote, "King Faisal of Iraq asked me if I would wear Arab clothes like his own while in camp. I should find it better for my own part, since it was a comfortable dress in which to live Arab fashion as we must do. I agreed at once very gladly, for army uniform was abominable when camel riding or when sitting about on the ground, and the Arab things which I had learned to manage before the war were cleaner and more decent in the desert." Here is the silk robe and keffiyeh, or headscarf, worn by T.E. Lawrence circa 1916 from the National Army Museum in London. And his steel and silver jambaya dagger, also from the National Army Museum. All 3 pieces were secured by the museum with grants before being sold to a foreign buyer. Here is another ivory silk robe belonging to T.E. Lawrence that was sold by Christie's auction house in 2016 for about $34,000 US. And finally, Peter O'Toole's own prop jambaya dagger was sold by Bonham's auction house for about $6,100 US in 2018. Dr. Frankenfurter, Drag Ensemble, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. With his sequin corset, fishnet stockings, and platform heels, Dr. Frankenfurter, an eccentric transvestite scientist, is the main antagonist in the cult classic The Rocky Horror Picture Show. English actor Tim Curry created the role of Frankenfurter in the 1973 original London production and later reprised it in the 1975 film adaptation. The campy musical production is meant to be a parody tribute to the science fiction and horror movies of the 1930s to 60s, with the stage production's music book and lyrics by actor and writer Richard O'Brien. O'Brien, pictured here, also played Riff Raff in the stage play and film. What makes Frank otherworldly is that he's from another planet called Transylvania. Tim Curry told the New York Times back in 1974, he says he's a transvestite transsexual, whatever that means. I don't play him as a transsexual, but he's a fairly complex guy. He just takes anything he can get. He's not fussy, really, though I think he's something of a wham bam thank you ma'am. And then Curry later said that Frank is actually pansexual. Tim Curry portrayed a gender-bending Solange in Glasgow Citizens Theatre production of The Maids back in 1971. Sue Blaine was the costume designer on that show, and it was only because of her friend Tim Curry, who was cast in the 1973 low-budget stage production of Rocky Horror, that she agreed to take the job on. Blaine arranged to borrow Curry's corset from The Maids, although it doesn't appear that it was ever returned, for it was repurposed for Frank by gluing sequins onto it. Blaine stated, but I can't confirm this to be true, that the costumes directly affected the development of punk rock fashion trends such as ripped fishnets and dyed hair. The entire budget for the film's costumes was $1,600, which, if that is in US currency, translates to a paltry $7,500. While Blaine was given a much larger budget for the film, she had to double up on costumes. And apparently, Sue Blaine conducted no research for her designs. Frank's tattoo on his upper right arm reads "Boss," and the one on the upper part of his right thigh is 4711, like the original Eau de Cologne. Pierre LaRoche, a former personal stylist and makeup artist for David Bowie, helped create the signature look for Frankenfurter. LaRoche was responsible for makeup done during Bowie's Aladdin Sane years, the lightning bolt across the eye, and third eye in the middle of his forehead. Tim Curry's makeup took 4 hours to apply, so he learned how to do it himself. Here are pictures of Frank's refurbished leather biker jacket from collector Mike Scott's website moviejackets.com. Frank's footwear for the sweet transvestite number were these women's satin platform block heel shoes from Terry de Havilland in London. As you can see, many of the rhinestones have fallen off after many years of use. The Rocky Horror Costume List blog, where I found these pictures, state that these elastic gores were added on both sides of the forefoot of the shoe for Curry's wider feet. Tony Manero's white polyester suit, Saturday Night Fever. Saturday Night Fever stars John Travolta as Tony Manero, a Brooklyn paint store clerk by day who morphs into a disco divo every Saturday night. His most memorable dancing outfit, worn for the finale and heavily featured in the marketing of the film, is this three-piece polyester white suit and black shirt with an unbuttoned collar. A Victoria and Albert Museum press release from August 2012 said that Saturday Night Fever is one of the most enduring films of the 1970s, and John Travolta's legendary performance as Brooklyn youth Tony Manero is now embedded in international pop culture. The source material for the drama film was a 1976 New York Magazine article titled "Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night." Travolta's character was based upon the article's protagonist Vincent. While originally thought to be a non-fiction piece, author Nick Cohen admitted 2 decades later that he had fabricated the whole thing. Costume designer Patricia von Brandenstein said in the V&A press release that, "When choosing what goes into such a major dance costume, I paid attention to the usual factors of cut, danceability, and maintenance, and I thought about the character of Tony Manero. I reasoned that Tony's position in his traditional Italian-American family is in extreme contrast to his dominant position in the neighborhood." She said, "By virtue of his style, panache, and above all his lithe grace on the dance floor, he is a hero to his local gang and by extension to all of us. Heroes from Sir Lancelot to Tom Mix wore white in the great contests to express purity and single-minded devotion to the task at hand." According to the V&A, director John Badham and Travolta originally assumed that the suit would be black for the final dance scene, only to be convinced by von Brandenstein to use white. She had 2 reasons for insisting on the color. She felt strongly that white represented Tony Manero's personal journey from ignorance to enlightenment, and it ensured that the suit would reflect the dazzling lighting effects in the dark discotheque. The BAM Style blog stated that von Brandenstein's shopping expeditions led her to a cheap men's boutique in Bay Ridge, particularly fitting as Tony was to be a denizen of Bay Ridge. Von Brandenstein found the all-polyester white suit and knew she had her armor for the newly enlightened Tony Manero, though she could have hardly anticipated its full impact. According to Christie's auction house, the off-the-rack suit is made by Leading Male of Kings Highway, Brooklyn. Von Brandenstein remembers throngs of girls screaming outside the shop for Travolta, then the star of the hit U.S. television series Welcome Back, Kotter. Christie stated that the black polyester shirt with white stitching, made by Pascal of Spain, is attached to the waistband of the trousers with an elastic fabric. This allowed Mr. Travolta the freedom to dance and strike his now legendary poses. Tony's distinctive footwear are a pair of black and gray leather wingtip brogue half boots with 5 lace eyelets and highly stacked heels worn with black socks. Here's the costume from the Hollywood Costume Exhibit in 2013. After an international search by the V&A Museum, the suit was discovered in London after it was sold to an anonymous bidder at Christie's auction for $145,500 US. The V&A said that Paramount Pictures had auctioned the suit for charity in 1979, where famous U.S. film critic Gene Siskel had purchased it. At the auction, the suit was inscribed by John Travolta on the interior lining with the words, "To Gene, so here's to a classic, your friend, John Travolta." Indiana Jones adventure outfit, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Back in the late 70s, actor Harrison Ford was already loved by millions of fans with his portrayal as the roguishly handsome smuggler Han Solo in both Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. But it was his turn as archaeologist and adventurer, Indiana Jones and Raiders, that carved his path as one of America's best-known action heroes. In 2003, the American Film Institute ranked Indiana Jones as the second greatest film hero of all time, just after Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. Indy's leather jacket, fedora, and tan trousers are not only his primary costume in Raiders, but they're worn throughout the entire Indiana Jones franchise that include 4 films. A 5th movie is said to be in the works. You might be surprised to learn that Harrison Ford was cast less than 3 weeks before principal photography began, and not the original choice by producer George Lucas. Tom Selleck was his first choice, but the shooting schedule conflicted with Magnum PI. Raiders costume designer Deborah Nadoolman-Landis said in an Empire Online interview that, "I made a complete top-to-bottom prototype outfit for Tom Selleck." He wasn't replaced until pretty far down the line. I think the film benefited tremendously when the casting changed. Indiana Jones has so many different levels, and a lot of that comes from the personality and introspectiveness of Harrison Ford. Here is director Steven Spielberg's concept sketch on the left and Deborah Nadoolman's finalized costume design on the right. As you can see, Spielberg is no Ridley Scott when it comes to drawing. Nadoolman based Indy's outfit, jacket, and fedora on protagonist Harry Steele's character in Secrets of the Incas, a lesser-known 1955 movie starring a very youthful Charlton Heston. Nadoolman recalled, "We did watch this film together as a crew several times, and I always thought it was strange that the filmmakers did not credit it later as the inspiration for the series, almost a shot-for-shot Raiders of the Lost Ark." Here's Indiana Jones's complete outfit on display at the 2014 Hollywood Costume Exhibit in Arizona. According to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., where one of Indy's jackets is on display, it was made by Peter Bottwright for Berman's and Nathan's costumers in London. They state that in 1980, Peter Bottwright of Wested Leather concessionaries at the time, were commissioned by Berman's and Nathan's, now Angels the costumers, to design and make Harrison Ford's first Indy jacket. Nadoolman told the Daily Beast that Indy's newly made jacket arrived from Berman's and Nathan's the night before the first day of shooting. Sitting by the pool after dinner, shared with George Lucas, Spielberg, Ford, and co-star Karen Allen, Nadoolman sandpapered the crap out of the jacket. She says that Ford was a carpenter and carried a big Swiss Army knife. She used that too, and mineral oils to soften it, and finished just hours before the 5 a.m. call time. Indy's hat was purchased from the famous Herbert Johnson hat shop in Savile Row, London. The hat was the shop's poet model. On the Raiders bonus feature DVD, Nudulman said that in order to properly age the hat, she grabbed and twisted it, then she and Harrison Ford both sat on it, and it eventually looked like a very lived-in and well-loved hat. When Indy's hat was made, the brim was shaped to cover his eyes for protection and to help hide faces when stunt doubles were being used. One of his hats is on display at the Smithsonian. This reproduction Indiana Jones hat, made from sable fine rabbit fur felt with a dark brown galloon ribbon work, is sold through Herbert Johnson's online store. According to Raider.net, Indy's shoulder bag is actually from the mid-1940s. They state that these bags were standard issue to everyone in London because the government was concerned that Hitler's attacks might involve poison gas. As such, hundreds of thousands of these bags were manufactured and issued to both British military personnel and British civilians during World War II. Meanwhile, Indy's handmade 16-plate bullwhip of kangaroo hide was about 9 feet long, although some shorter versions were used depending on the shot required. It was sold in December 1999 at Christie's auction house in London for about $35,000 US. According to Christie's, Harrison Ford originally donated it to the Institute of Archaeology in London to help raise funds for a new facility. Old Count Dracula robes, Bram Stoker's Dracula. In 1992, director Francis Ford Coppola set out to do an ambitious retelling of Dracula based directly on the 1897 source material from Irish author Bram Stoker. Actor Gary Oldman wore dozens of outfits for the film, including some head-to-toe practical creature costumes, but the one look that springs to mind most often is Oldman's Old Dracula. This ensemble included the sumptuous Chinese-inspired crimson red cloak that accompanied his heavy prosthetic makeup and 18th century-inspired wig. Not only had late costume designer Eiko Ishioka never designed costumes before her work with Coppola, but she went on to win an Oscar for Best Costume Design for the movie. Eiko transformed one of the story's most familiar tropes. She banished the expected long black cape and instead costumed Oldman in the now famous red robe that billows behind him as he prowls about the castle. Here's Eiko's costume design. Her take on old Dracula's robe was influenced by the Chinese emperors Yuan, Ming, and Qing. After the Han Dynasty, 18 centuries ago, the dragon became the symbol of imperial power and represented the emperor. The embroidery featured prominently on the emperor's robes. The elaborate gold and red embroidery on Dracula's robe appear to be a hybrid of two supernatural spirits, the dragon and the phoenix, a mythological bird. According to Feng Shui, the dragon and the phoenix are the ideal couple. Dracula represents the dragon, or masculine yang, while Mina, or Elizabetta, portrayed in flashbacks by Winona Ryder, represent the phoenix or feminine yin, creating a yin-yang balance. The symbol is also a close representation of the embroidery from Elizabetta's gown, seen here. Here are the Dracula and Elizabetta costumes at the Hollywood Costume Exhibit from 2013. Master wig maker Stuart Artingstall built Gary Oldman's wig based upon Oscar-winning hair and makeup designer Michelle Burke's design, seen here on the right. Every wig took many hours of painstaking work to hand-thread each hair into the base individually. Actor Gary Oldman shaved the front of his hairline to achieve the high widow peak look. Of old Dracula's two-bun wig, Michelle Burke says in an interview, "I looked at designs of the Hopi Indians and I went back to old Kabuki. This was a marriage between East and West." William Wallace Highland dress, Braveheart. Actor and director Mel Gibson portrayed William Wallace, a late 13th century Scottish warrior, with the film taking place from 1280 to 1314. Although Gibson was nearly 40 during shooting, his character was supposed to be in his 20s. And while called out for its inaccurate telling of history, the movie itself was praised by critics and went on to win a slew of awards. Despite its flaws, the movie still holds up today, and at the time of release helped fuel Scottish tourism, with fans coming from all over the world to visit. Braveheart earned costume designer Charles Note a BAFTA award and an Academy Award nomination, but lost out to The English Patient. Now, if at times it appears that Braveheart has a sort of Monty Python-esque look to it, you would not be wrong. Charles Note worked with the troupe back in the 70s and even co-designed the costumes for Terry Gilliam's Jabberwocky and Monty Python's Life of Brian. Dress historian and material culturist Brenna Barks even told me that after seeing Braveheart more recently, that she wondered if Note might have been trolling Mel Gibson. Here is Charles Note's original charcoal costume illustration of William Wallace with a note that reads, "Wallace Mr. Mel Gibson, second costume for battles, maker Francis Hill." Francis Hill was Charles Note's co-designer on his Monty Python films. And on the right is a 1995 Polaroid shot of Mel Gibson in full costume, but without his mullet hair extensions. Ranker wrote a piece titled, "Braveheart might be the most historically inaccurate movie ever made," stating that kilts did not become a significant clothing item for Scottish people until the 17th century. Brenna Barks, meanwhile, tells me that there was no tartan that we know of in the late 13th century, and the kilts in the film are basically things the actors wore like pinafores. So much wrong there. And that there are glaring inaccuracies of armor, fighting tactics, hairstyles, being filthy, etc. The armor worn by Wallace is called a coat of plates. A coat of plates is torso armor that consists of overlapping metal plates riveted inside of a cloth or leather garment like we see here. This garment was well established in Europe by the late 13th century, but I'm uncertain if it was commonly worn by Highlanders. What is inaccurate, and this is something that we see commonly in Hollywood movies, is that the plates would have been overlapping, leaving no gaps in between the plate. Here's Gibson's costume on display at the 2014 Hollywood Costume Exhibit in Arizona. Ranker stated that the blue face paint worn by William Wallace and his compatriots is also well off the real Scottish timeline. The Daily Mail states that the blue face paint in Braveheart is a nod to the Pictish tradition of body paint, but the real Picts fought stark naked, and there are records of them doing so up until the 5th century. The Roman name for the people, Picti, means painted people. Ranker also said there is no evidence to suggest that the Scottish Highlanders were sporting mullets with braids, dreads, and little fur attachments. In a recent auction on September 30th at the prop store, one of Gibson's Claymore swords sold at auction for about $70,000 US. Meanwhile, this entire William Wallace ensemble, including weapons, sold at auction back in 2007 for approximately $31,000 US, half the price of the Claymore. Ruby Rhod leopard jumpsuit, the fifth element. Chris Tucker portrays the outrageous radio host Ruby Rhod, who first appears in this gender-bending, one-piece, faux fur leopard jumpsuit when he corners Corbin Dallas on the hotel spaceship Fhloston Paradise. French fashion and costume designer Jean-Paul Gaultier created all of the costumes for the fifth element, including the scene stealer. The costume is especially flamboyant because of the oversized, off-the-shoulder collar and has a coordinating leopard staff, microphone, and then the entire look is finished off with a white unicorn wig. Even Rhod's entourage are coordinated with his look. This is concept artist Jacques Ray's artwork of Gaultier's design, complete with matching luggage. Here's the original Ruby Rhod costume on display at the Jean-Paul Gaultier fashion exhibit at the de Young Museum in San Francisco. In an interview, Gaultier explains that Prince was originally cast to play the character of Ruby Rhod. Gaultier had a meeting in Paris with the pop star where he presented this design. a jumpsuit made entirely of black fishnet and covered with long feather plume trim and a large plume tail. But when Gautier attempted to tell Prince in broken French about the faux cul part of the costume, which translates as fake ass, Prince thought Gautier had said something else entirely and left the meeting. In the end, Prince turned down the job because he thought the costume was too effeminate. The character would eventually go to actor and stand-up comedian Chris Tucker. While not convinced at first, Tucker came to appreciate his costumes, which he says helped him get into character. Tucker had said he took inspiration from both Prince and Michael Jackson in crafting his performance as Ruby Rhod. Quipped Gautier, maybe he's less Michael Jackson and more Janet. Austin Powers Blue Velvet Suit, Austin Powers International Man of Mystery. Yeah, baby! Austin Powers is a man of mystery, a 60s swinger, a British agent, and a bit of a moron. Actor Mike Myers portrays Austin as a caricature of James Bond and an archetype of 1960s fashion. Among his most memorable looks from his brightly hued wardrobe is Austin's blue velvet suit, finished off with a lace jabot and cuffs, mop-top hairstyle, crooked teeth, and horn-rimmed glasses, featured throughout the Austin Powers trilogy. Here is Austin Powers' epical blue velvet suit design created by costume designer Dina Appel. Costume designer Dina Appel said in an interview with costume and fashion writer Christopher Laverty of Clothes on Film that Mike Myers was a purist when it came to Austin and very smart to understand the value of an iconic image. He wanted the audience to be able to tune in to any scene or any still image and instantly know you were looking at Austin Powers. Appel said he hoped that people would dress up as Austin Powers for Halloween, so he wanted to give them something memorable to attach the character to. That greatly informed all of our choices, including his style, his glasses, and teeth and hair. Appel said that Mike Myers would have been happy to wear the same blue velvet suit for all three films. I thought as an international man of mystery that Austin should have a fairly extensive wardrobe. By repeating the blue velvet suit from time to time and film to film, as well as keeping the same silhouette and changing the fabrics, we created an instantly recognizable character. The Austin Powers franchise parodies numerous films and characters, including Ian Fleming's James Bond and the hedonistic, womanizing dandy Jason King from the 1970s TV show of the same name. Appel told the Los Angeles Times that a lot of Austin came from George Harrison, combined with a little Mick Jagger. The Times reported that, to research the period, Appel studied films from the mid to late 1960s, as well as episodes of TV's The Avengers and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. She scoured Life magazine for reality and British Vogue for fashion. Although Appel said in an interview with Christopher Laverty, excerpts printed in Empire magazine, that the shape of the suit came from research of George Harrison in those days. Harrison was my strongest influence for Austin. He had a formality of dress with great style and flair, still with a sense of humor. Appel said that she had all of Austin and Dr. Evil suits made at Universal Studios by the incomparable tailoring genius Tommy Velasco. Velasco worked as a tailor in Hollywood starting his career just before World War II. Austin Powers' hair and glasses are reportedly modeled after a young Professor Stephen Hawking. More likely, they're meant to reference the glasses worn by Michael Caine in his portrayal of Harry Palmer in the Ipcress File. According to retailers Mason & Sons, Caine wore these frames with optical lenses for all of his appearances in the Harry Palmer films. Michael Caine played Austin's father Nigel in the Austin Powers third installment Goldmember, wearing similar glasses. Here is Austin's suit at the 2014 Arizona Hollywood Costume Exhibit. Couture in the Suburbs has an amazing photo album of pictures on her website of all of the costumes from that exhibit, so I'll leave a link for that in the description below. And finally, here's a close-up of Austin's jabot and male symbol pendant. While there have been talks to do a follow-up fourth movie in the franchise, the project is currently stalled because the creators are unsure how they could proceed without the late Vern Troyer, who played Mini-Me. We would love to have included more costumes, but we don't have the space. Let us know your favorites in the comments below. And in case you missed it, here are the most epic women's movie costumes of the last century. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.